Welcome back and happy Sunday. Um, I have no idea actually how to begin a day with Sunday because typically, for as long as I remember, um, Sunday was usually a day where people just took a day off. Uh, More in a postmodern world, it is something that's almost a recovery day from a lot of partying the night before, if it was Saturday and Friday, and then almost preparing for a work week again Monday. So I'm taking this almost as an opportunity to say, thank goodness that we have that in the world, because I know in parts of the world, they don't have a weekend that's 2 days long. Sometimes it's one day. They only have one day off. I know in Egypt, they only have Fridays off. And then Sunday's a bit of a slower day just because there's a Coptic or a Christian population that would want the day off to kind of celebrate or commemorate whatever religious celebration or service they kind of believe in and want to celebrate. So aside from that, I want to almost kind of step back and say, okay, if I'm new to this idea of, having this recreation or this adult time to almost forget about my job and worldly responsibilities, whether they're family or they're not, and I just want to have that free time where I'm going to be accountable for whatever my actions are. So I'm being careful, and I know, like what I've learned from other people, how to almost recover from, partying or drinking a lot or spending a lot of time just, almost giving into whatever impulses that I kind of put off for the entire week, and I just want to relax so that I can have that almost stress relief from my body from like a difficult work week, and then I can go back to work and I can figure, you know what, if I have a difficult work week, I can look forward to a day off where I get to forget about all this and, relax. So it's almost like creating that hobby. I mentioned people who are going through depression, they almost don't have anything happy to look forward to. So their life just becomes very difficult and very mundane or monotonous, and they don't really have anything fun that they kind of create for themselves. So if we have something to look forward to like that, it almost helps us get through life. We don't have to, especially for people who may have had difficult life circumstances where they didn't really get a chance to wonder about, if this circumstance hadn't happened, how would I plan my life? So in some ways, it's almost like, well, I can look at it from the two perspectives. I can think about Cain and Abel, right? I can say, well, maybe I am from the family of Abel, so I don't have a lot of practice at life. My family doesn't have a lot of practice at life, so I'm still trying to think proactively about life from a young age. So I could be maybe somebody who was 14, and I had a friend of mine who got pregnant when she was 18, so she was actually my sister's friend, and she became kind of my friend. They'd visit often, and I was somebody who started to think about, well, what if I get pregnant? Like, how's that going to change my life? Because I noticed that my sister's friend, she's had to drop out of school for a little bit. She wanted to go to university, but she decided she's going to raise her baby first. Then she got a part-time job. Maybe she lives at home with her mom, so her mom helps her raise her baby while she goes to work. So basically, what I can learn from that is everything that she had almost planned for her life, she almost had to kind of put on pause for a little bit and decide, I am going to have to figure out what I want to do with my life right now. And then if I'm going to kind of want to come back to what my plan was later on when my child grows up. So that's an option, but it's almost like, thank goodness that you're able to adapt to your circumstance in that way, because now other people are able to learn from your life path, and society is able to understand, well, how do we support you? So sometimes you'll have workplaces who will create a type of flex hours, so they know that, if you're somebody who in the future are going to have to drop your kids off at daycare, and we know that that whole process of waking up, having breakfast, planning for your day, going through tantrums of, I don't want to wear this, and the kids who are just like, they have a certain kind of way of doing things, and if the parents don't know what that is yet, it's almost like this trial and error process before actually getting out the door to daycare. And then you think, oh my god, I finally did it. And then you get there, and then they're like, we don't want to stay here. And then you're crying and you're melting down, and you're both sad, and you're just like, oh, I'll get you after school, it's gonna be fine, or after daycare. And then you kind of feel sad, like, do they hate me now because I abandoned them? But then you're like, no, I didn't. They like it there. It's just, it's getting used to that kind of transition and that routine of, it's hard to sometimes say goodbye. But I know I'll see you at the end of the day. And in spite of that, it takes time to build that habit and that trust. And then you think, okay, now I got to get to work. Now, to know that all of that can happen and I don't have to worry about getting in trouble when I get to work for being late is already its own relaxation. It's like, thank God my boss isn't going to be mad at me. I don't have an appointment first thing when I get to work. It's almost like I can maybe delay my appointment so that I know if I can get to work by 10 o'clock, my first appointment might be 10:30, so I have some time to kind of settle in, get everything set up, and then start my day. So knowing this, it's almost like when I'm 14, I can think, wow, I like that flexibility that society is really responding to what the population wants, right? So then that makes me, who's 14, starting high school, thinking, wow, like how did this happen? Like how do people think like this? So then I'll want to go to Cain is this way now, and think, I mean, you've been in the world longer, obviously. We don't know after Cain almost killed Abel, like when was it that Abel kind of stayed sleeping and then Cain was like developing ideas and then thinking, okay, well, when Abel wakes up, I'm almost going to be a little bit ahead, and then I have to almost be, well, it's not going to be actual Cain and Abel, it's going to be like their families. And we have to remember to be patient with them because their understanding and their experience of the world is going to be different. And outside of that, it's different depending on where they are in the world. So there are parts in the world where maybe they haven't tried drinking alcohol yet, right? So it's not even something they even try to include in their culture. Whereas in other cultures, that's like just part of the norm. Like everybody does it. And it's like, if you don't want to, that's fine. But we have like laws, and so there's so much in place to help support people who, maybe didn't know the safe ways of drinking alcohol, and so they become addicted, and then how do you overcome that? And then other people who've seen people like that think, okay, I have to drink in moderation so that I don't get addicted. And then they think, well, what is it that causes addiction? And then it usually is, well, it's depression, people who are unhappy with their life and they just want to forget about everything. So then you think, oh, so when I drink to be happy, it's better than to drink because I'm sad. So I have to find something in my life that's consistently making me happy and making me look forward to things. So all of these things now we understand why creation stories are a thing, even if we don't believe in them like in a fundamentally true way, as it were. Like you can read scripture and you can read different variations of renditions of the creation story. Like in the Bible, you have the Genesis, which is like the creation story. In the Quran, it'll talk about Adam, but it's almost like not at the very beginning. At the very beginning of the Quran, it'll talk actually about God. It'll talk about praise, and it'll talk about why God is the one that is worthy of all the praise. And then it'll say why. So it'll say because he is the King of all kings. He's the only one that can actually judge in an accurate way. So it almost reminds us, like, don't judge people and their actions because we don't know what their history and their subconscious is from the past and how that's built them to be who they are presently, and why maybe God's giving them the excuse and the allowances that he's giving them. And then we're asked, and then at the end is almost like a prayer. It's almost saying, can you please guide us always like to a right path that's most right for who we are, so that we're evolving forward from what our ancestors might have been in the past. And then it's also asking to align us with different prophets and their stories so that they're relevant to us. So if I'm somebody who's maybe a biologist and I want to understand genetics and, how to think about animal life, maybe the story of Saul will be relevant to me with the camel. That, it came out of the mountain, and the people of Thamud were told, one day is for the camel, one day is for the people, the population. So, like, what is it that's almost like a give and take between us and nature that we have to understand? Especially for people who want to understand marine biology. So people want to go underwater and try to discover, like, wow, if we take all this really, really like vibrant and exotic life and try to put it in a museum, what's that going to do to the population that's actually in the water? Is it just going to completely die off? Because that would be really sad if we never had it anymore. So it's things like this where we're allowed to be in nature, and we're allowed to almost take parts of it out for our own well-being, and to study and to almost have ideas of how to build a civilization, but we shouldn't take all of it out. So it's almost like there has to be a balance, like a bit of a moderation with how we interact with everything around us. So Cain would have already learned this now, because he's already knowing, when I have an impulse because I'm angry, I'm going to have to learn to slow down how I react. Whereas Abel might have been already somebody who was patient. So now he learns, I can be patient, but I can't let myself be bullied. So I have to learn how to be assertive, which means I have to learn how to stand up for myself. So all these things take a lot of time. And sometimes if we don't have people in our family who can role model this for us, we almost have to learn it on our own, with friends, with family, sometimes with neighbors, with people we meet at school, sometimes with people we end up working with. So it's a very long process. So this almost helps us understand why, like sometimes when I used to watch movies or I'd read novels where people used to get almost angry at each other, you'd end up having a lot of different perspectives. So you'd have like the main characters in this story, and then outside of that, there's like this disagreement. And then these two people almost have to confront each other, which means they have to almost say, why did you do this to me? Why did you do this to me? And then these people on the outside can intervene. And sometimes if they do, it ends up actually making a bigger confusion. If they don't, then these two people can usually solve the problem. But then you think in a real world, it's never really just between two people that there's a problem. Maybe when you're younger, but as you get older, it becomes very, very involved, and everybody almost wants to have a say in how to solve a problem. So you might think, you know, how come this person can't just automatically say, you're not my friend, and write them off completely? So if you watch a movie, a series on Netflix, it's called Emily in Paris. You'll understand a little bit about why people want to have a kind of diplomacy about relationships and professionalism. So there's this a part, I think, halfway through. So anyways, Emily's a girl who lives in America, and she ends up going to Paris for a year to almost be somebody who promotes high-end brands. So it's almost like with social media now, people want to have, let's pretend they sell makeup. So she wants to be somebody who says, with this makeup, for example, if you have a social media platform, if the more you use it and promote it on whatever it is that your channel is, the more we'll give you free stuff, and then we'll actually give you money to continue to do this. It'll become your job, right? So that's kind of what it sounded like she was doing in the States when she was there. When she went to France, because they have a little bit of a different way of understanding culture, if people in America understood, yeah, we should have some kind of professionalism when we get angry. In Paris, it wasn't like that. It sounded like in that kind of series, the way they were showing it, it was if two people get mad, that's it. They just stop interacting with each other and they just stay mad. So she was somebody who tried to bridge, and she went to, so I think what they were originally trying to sell was a clothesline. It was, so just think of it, that may not actually be 100% accurate, but if it was a clothesline and makeup, and you're trying to put the two together, because you could say usually, like, if you're in fashion, you want to have a certain look, and then you want to have makeup that kind of accents the way your whole style is. So if you think, it doesn't make sense for you guys to be angry at each other, so what could have happened that led to that happening? You know, that kind of tension. So that's what she ends up trying to discover. And in doing so, I almost learned what my initial reaction was. My initial reaction was like the people in France. I was like, just forget it. Like, if you guys don't get along, don't get along. But then it was, but how do you know that, you know, in the future, people who leave both companies and just try to, you know, meet somewhere in the world end up actually wanting to be friends, but then they decide we can't because we have this, like, almost like bad karma from our past that we couldn't resolve. So it almost comes us back to like Romeo and Juliet and that story about feuds and families who are, like, for some reason, like these two groups of people who can't agree on something, and it just becomes something that promotes itself in the future, and it doesn't get resolved, and it just causes problems. So this helps us understand why we evolve and why we want civilization and why we want these new understandings around emotional intelligence, and why holding grudges actually ends up harming us more than it actually helps us. So then you understand, okay, maybe in France they decide we're not going to be able to be professional friends or like have a business partnership together, but at least we can be professional so that we're not sabotaging each other. So if somebody tries to do business with the person that's doing makeup, they won't say, no, don't go there because they just have bad business practices. Instead, it could be, yeah, you know what, we tried to work together in the past and things just didn't work out, but, you know, they do have a nice fragrance line to complement their cosmetics, right? So then when people hear about that, they're like, wow, that's really professional. And then they'll say, yeah, you know what, we don't really get along with them either, but they do have really, really good fabrics, and like their styles and their stylists or their models, you know, they're really fashionable, or they have really, you know, contemporary fashion taste, or they'll just get, like, so that whole sort of keeping things professional, even if as people we have different temperaments or we don't get along, it just speaks about a certain kind of culture and a sort of, it's very classy. Like, it's just a way of saying, you know, why don't we try to aim for that instead of always just having these fights and then we can't resolve them and then we can't get along. So the reason I bring this up is, within Islam, this is something that we haven't really learned how to do yet. So I'm assuming that I'm just going to allow ourselves to be able and say, okay, we came from Muhammad, and his idea of life at the time was, we don't want to create a war. We're actually trying to think of a new way of living. So what we know of Muhammad is that he was from a culture or a tribe that was already known to be very prideful. So you think, okay, that's fine. But he was a person who tried to kind of overcome that. So he was someone who tried to say to himself and to everyone around him, I don't have the same beliefs as you. I'm going to change my beliefs. I don't want to attack you. I don't want you to attack me. I'm just going to leave and I'm going to try to allow myself to find a safer place to live. So then you can think, okay, so we're from Muhammad, right? That's like almost like we can say, can we trace our line from Abel? And we almost want to say that, but we can't because we know that his children didn't survive, so they didn't parent anybody. So it's almost like his lineage was cut off. And you think, okay, well, let's go to Christ. Same thing. He didn't marry. He didn't even have kids. So then we think, well, so then who are we from? Who is the original parent? And then so I put this here as kind of like, that's a good question. Like, where can we be from if we want to train our mind to say, well, look, we're used to almost having a role model and we want a role model in the world, but then we're so used to thinking of a founder of a way. So we think Muhammad was the founder of Islam. We think Christ was the founder of Christianity. And then we go back to Moses and think, well, maybe, because we know that he got married and he had kids, but we don't know anything about his family. It was so long ago. Then we think, oh wait, but he married somebody from the tribe or a prophet actually at his time whose name was Jethro. What we know of Jethro was oh my gosh, he had a really big struggle, and it was to try to maintain a balance. So it's what's called right now is ethical trade or fair trade. So it's basically healthy business practices, so that if you are charging somebody for something, you're charging them in a way that's commensurate with the amount of money that you could pay the people that maybe harvested something. So if you're buying coffee, for example, you want to make sure that I'm charging $10, for example, and I'm making it a little bit more expensive than maybe other brands because the people who harvest the coffee live in maybe Central America or South America, and the labor there is supposed to be cheap. Like, you're not supposed to be paying people a lot of money. That's what people want to assume is the correct way. But we have to pay them the correct amount because people have to make a living and it's a very, very difficult job. So we actually have to pay them more so that we can enjoy this really, really good coffee. And then we end up charging extra so that we have more money to pay these people. So now we're just looking for the cheapest labor so that we can make the most money. And then it becomes, that's basically where Moses' his lineage can be traced to. Him, Moses and the Pharaoh and Jethro, Shrike. So if you think, okay, so if that's almost like our parents outside of Adam, when we think of Adam, we think that's so far away, we don't really know other than, you can be angry and you can have desire and you have to figure out what's my impulse and what's my delayed gratification. And outside of that, it's, yeah, I want to make a lot of money, but I have to make sure that I'm being fair and kind with everybody so that everybody's being treated and has a fair chance to almost move on in life in a healthy way without feeling like they have to take shortcuts and then feel like I'm going to steal from you now because you didn't pay me enough. And then it just creates all this mess in the world that we can't really resolve for a very long time. So we could think, okay, well, that's true. We know of Christ that he was somebody who also used to promote peace and say, if somebody does something to aggress against you, try to be kind to them in return, or like turn the other cheek means try to ignore them. Or you can say, as Muhammad would say, you have your way and I have my way. So it's almost like we can try to get along, but if we find that we're not able to, then I won't get in your way, but please also don't get in my way. And we don't have to assume that we have to integrate what we believe either. So if you believe that you want to pray every day, and I believe that I just want to pray on Sunday, but during the week I'm remembering God in different ways, that's fine. We don't have to say, well, how about every other day we worship each other's way of living? It's just like that could get really confusing and very inconsistent if we don't have a common understanding that lifts both of us in the same way. And then we decide, okay, we believe how to talk about it in the same way, but we'll still practice in a different way. And that's fine. That's kind of like a postmodern approach now, where it becomes a very almost non-judgmental way of how to understand God and how to grasp meaning and make it a spiritually fortifying way of thinking for you, so that you don't feel like you're a hypocrite in any way, or I'm just doing this to please this person because I work for them or anything like that. So then you think, okay, so what I know now is that to believe in Muhammad doesn't mean that I have to practice everything he did, though there is blessing in it because he was sent as a role model. To believe in Christ doesn't mean that I'm going against Muhammad, but it just might mean that his because there's like a 500-year gap between the two of them and there are different parts of the world, there might be challenges for me in North America to say, well, what's in Europe, what's in Arabia, and what's not in North America. So then you can think, yeah, that's true. Like in North America, maybe because we have to deal with a lot of, colder climates, maybe contemplating nature in the same way that they did in Europe and Arabia is going to be different. And even if we do contemplate nature, the nature is very, very different. So there's some things that I have to kind of learn how to understand for myself and build on what happened in those two kind of geographies. And then you can think, I can understand now why at the beginning of the Quran talks about praise of God being almost like the opening to the spiritual path. It's almost to say, outside of these prophets, outside of these geographies, outside of these cultures, races maybe, like different people who are born in different geographies tend to have, their genetics are just very different because they've evolved in certain different ways. So they have certain strengths more than others. So you can say, independent of all that, if I was to take all of that away, what I have is God, who's ineffable, who I can't touch in any way, but I know exists because look at how complex my body is. Look how unbelievably intricate the universe and the galaxy is. So it's almost to say there is this massive force in the world that I know I can rely on because it tells me. The very beginning chapter is actually called the opening, which means it's almost like I'm asking God with his attributes of compassion to help me on this way. If there's power in the world, he's always going to be a greater power that's going to be able to support me. And he's given me so many examples throughout history in different kinds of story like fashion, not to give a history lesson, but almost to say, I'm giving you the most important thing that you can learn from one story and leaving a lot open for interpretation so that you can bring it into your present life and say, well, what can I augment from my present life to a story that happened so that I can create a new meaning and synthesize something new for myself to help me understand how to be in the world in kind of like an ethical way. So if you think of this now, then you're like, this is starting to make a lot more sense now. Like I can see why somebody might want to align with Shuaib or Jethro and wonder, like, he was known as somebody who used to actually tell his people when they'd say, we don't like the way you're balancing or like creating commerce. So he would say, like, you already know who I am from when I was young. Like I grew up in this community. And they would say to him, they'd say, well, because we know who you are, we're not actually going to torture you. So he's like, so you know who I am. And just because I'm almost calling you to a higher ethic, you're trying to say, we're going to be lazy and we're going to almost keep you there because we know your family or whatever it is, example that they're giving. But we still don't want your new call for like a higher ethic. So it's almost like we like being rich and we don't like helping the poor. And we like, so Jethro was just like, fine, but you have to understand that at any moment, God could just say, fine, you be poor and see how you feel about, people who decide to be, unrelenting and not wanting to share with you. So in this way, it's almost like, oh my gosh, like anybody who reads that story now could think that's true. Like anybody's circumstance could change at any minute. Like you hear, usually in the fall season in different parts of Central America, there's these massive hurricanes that just destroy like entire areas and people lose their homes. It's like, oh, not again, right? So then you think, like, what is it that nature is trying to tell us about being charitable with the world, like having something for yourself and then a way to show gratitude that I want it to maintain itself and increase and also spread to other people. I have to think about like what is it that I can do, and just being somebody who gives is the way to make what you have increase and help others appreciate the value of what it is that you have. So then they start to, well, we don't want to be lazy. Like we really want to work at understanding how to create this kind of life that's comfortable and that wants to also continue to give. And then it just creates this exponential kind of kindness in the world that doesn't really end. So now if you think back to Cain, then you can think, yeah, I guess if he took this long, let's say, I don't know, what we understand of the world is 8,000 years, right? Let's say we've been on the, as humans, we've been on Earth for 8,000 years, and you think, okay, and now maybe evil's just starting to wake up, where he's very kind. There's so many kind people in the world right now. We know of Jains in, I think, parts of India or some parts of Asia. They're just people who are very, very nonviolent. So they understand, like, even like insects, they have a very hard time harming anything in life. And for some reason, they just end up being very, very affluent people. And it's almost like it kind of talks about what we would expect of God. Like if you have to defend yourself, obviously you have to defend yourself. But if people know of somebody that this person's kind and he's very charitable in life, it becomes almost that lineage or like this legacy that continues to promote itself through history. And then people learn from that and they think like, I want to try that and I want to see, what does that do? But then you can also think, well, even people who want to almost attribute like a nonviolent way to a family or to a contemporary religion, as it were, or like a construct of a group of people, we can also still stop ourselves and say, in spite of that, so that the culture doesn't get mixed up. So let's say I'm someone in Seattle, right? So I'm out in the west part of North America, and I'm thinking, I want to practice a little bit of what, so where am I here? So if you've got like all of North America and here's kind of the West and this is Seattle, and then you just go a little bit that way, you're going to end up going towards Asia and like Japan and the other side of the world on that way, instead of going all the way around. So then you might think the culture in America is going to be a lot different than what's in Asia, but I want to practice nonviolence. So then what do I think? Like I can take a lesson from Muhammad and Christ, is that it's not that their family, as it were, is what's promoting itself through life. So you can think lineage is important, tradition is important, family legacies are important, but I think it's to understand the spirit of what they came with. So then it doesn't become something that people almost want to own and say, if you want to call yourself Muslim, for example, you have to dress this way. Or if you want to call yourself Christian, you have to do this. Or if you want to call yourself Universalist, you have to be like Gandhi and do this. Or, if you want to like Rumi and understand mysticism, you have to do what Rumi did in the area of Afghanistan. Or it's almost like this little pocket, which is surrounded by, I assume, like the Gulf states, and then going around Asia. It's just this little it's almost like a little cave. And you think about all this and you think, yeah, that's true. Like we tend to almost construct, and it makes sense. We almost construct these geographies around the world and we want to affiliate them with a person or like a historical figure. And then when we pull them out of their context, we don't really know where to place them. So you think, well, I want to take part of Gandhi's life and I want to understand it. I want to take part of Muhammad's life. I want to take part of Christ's life, part of Moses, and maybe someone who's contemporary. So you can think about somebody, I don't even know, like maybe somebody in Hollywood, right? Somebody who's a philanthropist or like made a lot of money and then likes to give back in some way, right? And you put all these people together, you're building your own identity now, which is kind of building on what I said in my last video, is that I don't really want to almost say like, study this historical figure and decide, how to put this together based on what I've mentioned in the past. That could be like a novel study or like a group study or like an independent study that a person does. Sometimes that happens in schools. But for you as an individual, if you're just gradually studying what all these people taught and you're putting it all together, not necessarily like in a conscious way, you're just subconsciously always thinking about it, you actually become this person who's just very, very integrated and enriched by like all these stories and all these narratives that these people kind of provided into the world. And then you think, do I have to call myself something now? Like, do I have to say that I'm Christian? Do I have to say I'm Jewish? And sometimes saying that is okay, because it's almost like maybe this is the most that I know about a way of life, is that I like to be somebody who thinks about oneness and doesn't have like a material way that helps me think about God, but I do rely on the universe to help me think. So it's almost like I can't not have anything in the world help me think about God. But if I do, it's just a temporary thing to help me approximate meaning so that I can almost keep it in my subconscious. And that way, if that thing isn't there anymore, I don't feel lost, or I don't feel like I have to panic now, because now that it's not there, are the meanings gone? You can think, no, like sometimes it's good to have these reminders. So that's where people build regular practices or habits of, in the morning when I wake up, I want to have this journal that I've started where at the very beginning, maybe I read that opening chapter where it reminds me, I have to praise God. There's this praiseworthy element to him that's outside of anything he's ever done for anything or anybody. Outside of that, I'm grateful for who he is and what he's done for the world. And then outside of that, yeah, he is the King of Kings. So even if there's power in the world, he's the most powerful. Maybe because my job in life is that I am somebody who's a lawyer, maybe I'm glad that I'm able to practice that too. Like the best of my ability in an ethical way. I'm able maybe to defend families going through divorce so that they can still get along even if they can't live together. So all of these things almost helps us remember that, if I end up having to move, I can't live in North America anymore and I end up deciding to move to Europe, I'm not going to lose God in any way. I'm just going to be in a new context that helps me appreciate different things about life. So in that way, you can see why sometimes now when people decide we want to move or we want to live somewhere else, it's not as big a deal as it might have been in the past, because they feel like, well, God's everywhere. I can find anything in the universe that's going to reinforce for me a new understanding about how the universe works. And that's basically what a monotheist is. Somebody who's also Hanif, someone who's just inclining to a private way of thinking about the world that doesn't rely on anything being permanent, because we know nothing is permanent. If I die right now, even if I have, like a bank account that's full of money and like a treasure, one of those safety boxes that's full of treasures, if I die, that's not going to come with me. Let's say I'm dead and I stay dead for 500 years. When I come back, I might have family who's used it all up. They may have used it up for a good cause. They may not have. All I have basically is these ideas that I have in my subconscious that when I wake up, I'm going to almost try to find ways to wake them up again in me. Be like, I remember, loving to live by the ocean. So then you'll go to the ocean and be like, oh yeah, what is it about the ocean again? And then you'll almost maybe want to hear the music because you love the sound of, crashing waves. And then you'll think, oh, music. And then maybe you'll stay up at night and you'll just listen to the crickets and like the quiet. And then maybe, so all these things almost bring back that sound or that serene that comes with just listening. And then you think, what is it that I used to like listening to about music? And maybe you'll find classical music. And you think, yeah, it brings a certain kind of harmony and quiet and helps me think of different meanings. And then you think, wait, there used to be words that I used to, and then you think poetry, and then you try to create your own meaning outside of poetry. And then you see people practicing in a certain way or looking a certain way, and you think, oh yeah, I think I used to remember people talking about God, or like, what is the universe again? And then you find scripture. Like maybe by then it's really, really old and you have to go to museums or really old libraries that have archives. So all of these things, that's basically in your subconscious. And that's what you end up keeping with you forever. It doesn't leave. So that's why we almost want to always build a more ethical way of existing in the world. So that's the only thing that we get to keep, and we get to keep forward. And it's what becomes our heaven. Like we're basically building our heaven. So I'm going to leave it at that just to kind of help us understand why I keep harping on like monotheism and oneness and gratitude, delayed gratification, and some of the beginnings of what can impede that growth. So we talked about pride and desire, almost trying to moderate, like, what is it about desire that I have to be careful about when I have an impulse? When do I have to slow down? And then where's my pride? Am I doing this to show off, or because I'm trying to understand a healthy self-esteem, which is I'm grateful for what God gave me. And I want to feel good about myself, because when I feel good about myself, I want to explore the world, which becomes, I have to understand different things about the world, and I have to be open-minded. So I'm not closed-minded about, well, they're doing it wrong, and I'm the only one doing it right, or the opposite. You always feel bad about yourself because you're like, why can't I ever get it right? So this is what the postmodern world is. It's just basically a way of saying, because we've developed into this massive global village where we're all in this interconnected network where everybody can learn from anybody at any time. Anybody can connect with anybody at any time. And with language, we even have like Google Translate, so you can talk to somebody who doesn't speak your language, but you can translate it and kind of get a rough idea of, what the almost summary of what the conversation could have been, would have been. And all of this basically reminds us that, yeah, family is important. Keeping relationships with our neighbors and our community is important. Having a professional way of existing in the world is important. But ultimately, I have to have a reminder with me and God, or like the universe, that continually reminds me to be grateful and all the things that I'm grateful for, and to contemplate the universe, so that I'm almost continually inspired. Because we know of angels is that they want to learn more about God, and it's almost like they're almost on par with us as humans. So as we evolve, they want to find out, like, what is it that God's inspiring you with? And then they learn, and then they go inspire other people. So it's always God who's moving us forward. If you think of like a Porsche, like the engine's always at the back of the car, right? It's always pushing forward. And that's what it is. If you think, if humanity's stuck in a tradition and it has a hard time like pulling away from it and moving forward, it always thinks, okay, we're going to move forward, but it wants to keep the tradition. And sometimes that's what'll happen. Something will happen that'll just completely remove tradition, and then we're stuck almost like, wait, where? And it's like, yep, just try. And then you end up like, I have to call on God. Like there has to be a universe or like something in the universe that's going to help us, not lose footing or like completely have the carpet pulled out from under us, as it were. And then we think, okay, well, wait, if we go backwards and think about what tradition was, it was basically a person who was inspired. So you think, okay, that makes sense. And then you can kind of go backwards and study history and then realize the importance of history and how to build on it rather than just to try to bring it into the present and then say, it doesn't work because it was so long ago and we have this new technology and we can't know how to think about it without wondering about it for a very long time. So it becomes this almost new outlook, like this massive new horizon in front of you that you're like, wow, there's like so much now that we can think about that we never maybe appreciated was a possibility for the future.